Hello world, my name is Tim Russell and welcome back to another daily game dev video. I'm the developer of a game called Battleborn Tactics, which you can wishlist now, and you should do that if you haven't done so already. Today, we're talking about intuitive versus analytical design, what it is and how to adapt it to how you design games, and maybe figure out a little bit about yourself and a little bit about how other people design things, and maybe wrap your head around how there's not necessarily a right way to design, but the best way to design is really a multitude of ways to design. And it's all, and basically there's no right answer to anything, and have an existential crisis. Yeah, we're going to talk about all that today. So what is intuitive design and what is analytical design? That's what I want to talk about. So I want to start off with the first one, intuitive design. And intuitive design is basically pattern recognition based on life experience, being able to feel something. Right? Intuition is the thing that you get when you can't really voice why you feel a certain way, but you feel a certain way. It's a gut feeling, if so. Analytical design is when you design something based on analysis. You research something, you look something up, you look at numbers, you look at whatever it is that you are trying to analyze, and then you come to game mechanics or themes or whatever based on those numbers. And now both of these things are really big in game design. And if you ask any game designer or anybody out there, they'll tell you that usually that they have kind of a preference on one end or the other. We talked about on the channel theme versus mechanics. Same thing there. Like a lot of game designers will usually have a preference. Do they come up with the theme and the world and stuff first and then figure out mechanics to match that? Or do they come up with the mechanics and the verbs and stuff the stuff that you do and then figure out kind of what story makes sense on top? There's no right answer, but why I think these two things are extra important. Theme versus mechanics is another interesting topic like that, but intuition versus analytical design is important because there are very valuable pros and cons and things to learn from each design. Whereas like with theme and mechanics, you kind of need both, like whether you like it or not. But with intuition and analysis, very often you find designers that are extremely biased towards one end, and they only kind of approach game dev from that end. And so I want to kind of talk about like kind of what you can learn from each approach and where you can kind of see yourself as a designer and how it can help you design better games. So the best place to start would be to talk about intuitive design. And personally, like, that's kind of how I design a lot of my games is intuitive design. That's actually one of the things I love about game dev is the fact that I can sit down and just kind of make stuff, right? Like, what do I feel like this game needs? Oh, it needs this, so I'm going to add that. And that's one of the cool things about it. And it's really, really cool on shorter timelines because like you can just like kind of, the smaller your iteration cycle is, right? Like during a game jam, let's say you got 48 hours. You can make something really fast and just say, oh, you know what? This would be really much better with guns. So then you can add guns, right, real quick, and then just like, okay, I'd really be cool if the bullets exploded. And you could just kind of like, you can kind of bullshit your way through a game jam game that way. And honestly, you kind of have to because there's not a lot of time there, right? But on the flip side of that is we see projects that have been going on for years that they are a mess. They're not really a game. They are a tech demo of 10,000 different features, right? And I'm not trying to call anybody out here, okay? My lovely fellow game developers that are perfect just like me and would never make these mistakes. But the people not like us, those people, they add a bunch of stuff into their games. And the problem is, like, the deeper you get in a project, you lose some of that clarity, right? So if clarity is your ability to discern what's good and bad in a given game design, the longer you get, the more clarity you lose. Therefore, based on that equation, the deeper in a project you get, the harder the intuitiveness of your design can get. Not always, but this is especially worse with solo developer. I'm a solo developer. I do a lot of my game dev alone. But I try to stream it on Twitch, which I have a whole video talking about never dev alone and how you should kind of dev in an open area, because the more closed off you are, the more you can get lost in your own train of thought. And that intuitive, what started out as a feature, as like a benefit to the intuitive design, can often turn into a detractor. You can go too far in one area. You can add too much. You can other things come into play, like you can confuse intuition with boredom, right? And just be like, oh, I really want to work on exploding bullets, and I really think this game needs exploding bullets, but really you're just fucking bored of working on the character controller and you want to work on explosive bullets. You know what I mean? So like definitely include other people in your process if you're an intuitive designer, because you want to make sure that you have this you maintain clarity as much as you can. It's hard to do the longer the project goes, but you want to make sure that you can maintain clarity, and you want to make sure that you can take these little breaks and come back to it, because intuition works best with those gut feelings, right? With those experiences like, oh, I played this thing and I feel like it should be this way. That's why feedback is so great, because you get to kind of sample everybody's intuition. So it's really, really effective, and it's one of my favorite ways to design games. But like I said, the longer it goes on, the less clarity you have, and sometimes your intuition can kind of not get so clear anymore. The other side is the analytical design, and this is where the numbers come in. This is where the data comes in. So one of the things I've started doing with all my games is I have actual data that gets stored about all of the play sessions. So every time you play one of my games, GameAnalytics.com is what I use, and it stores how long the player has played, the play session, the play time, whether or not they've returned to for future play sessions. And then I also store individual game data, like in Battleborn Tactics, for example. Every time they complete a level, it stores that. It stores all of the levels that they complete and all the boss levels that they complete, so I can build out a funnel of how far the average person has gotten in the game. And that's really, really useful, because one of the things that I realized with Phallophobia is I've got game analytics on Phallophobia, and there's one level in the entire game that when you look at the deaths per level, this level just spikes up. It spikes. It's called Strain. If you played Phallophobia, you probably had fun in Strain. But as an intuitive designer, which I made that whole game on intuition, right? I really did. That entire game is just what I felt like the game should be. As an intuitive designer, I would have missed stuff like that. And you know what? Some people said, hey, Strain is hard. People actually told me that. They told me that. And I was like, yeah, it's hard, but it's in the anger section, right? It's in the anger section, and this whole game is about giving you an emotional journey through the 5 stages of grief. Stage number 2 is anger. It should make you angry. And like, I kind of thematically thought that. But when I saw the graph, when I saw the analysis, when I saw the numbers, I was like, oh shit, it's like it's not just higher, it's way higher. It's like when you make a pie graph of all of the levels that people have died in and how many deaths per level they've had, it's like a big chunk of that pie graph. Okay, so the analytical design from that, and understanding like these numbers and the analysis of all this stuff and actual data, helps me with designing games, especially when it comes to difficulty and things like that. Now, I've taken that a step farther for Battleborn Tactics, because the reason why I chose to design this project and to take it to Steam and make it into a full release was because I had data on Phallophobia, I had data on Cypherpunk, which is on pause right now. I had data on Barn Battles, which was the Game Jam version of Battleborn Tactics. And Battleborn Tactics, out of the last 10 or so games that I've made, including Game Jam games and stuff, had the highest average or mean playtime out of all of my games by several times. The average playtime, so it's worth noting that a lot of these playtimes are on web games too. So it's really hard to keep people around with web games, just because they're in a browser, and then there's YouTube, and then there's videos of cats, and then they're off to the races doing other stuff. Whereas it's a little bit easier to retain once someone's bought your game and is actually sitting in front of it. But the web games generally have a low playtime, and the average playtime for a lot of my games is between 2 and 3 minutes. Barn Battles, which is the Game Jam version of Battleborn Tactics, which you should wishlist down below. Go do that and then come back. You can hit a pause button. Once you've done that, and now you're back, welcome back, had a playtime, or an average playtime of close to 10 to 12 minutes. And what's even crazier is when you actually break that out by players, you've got an even bigger disparity, because you've got people that click off immediately, like after 10 seconds, and you got people that play for an hour or 2 hours long on a web game, like a game that's just in a browser, right? I'm not used to seeing that in my data. And so when I was deciding like which game to make, I was like, okay, that that's probably the best candidate. And even based on Cypherpunk, like I've talked about in the past, it's got a lot of design issues, but I tried to take the analytical approach of like what works, and I'm taking the analytical approach in Battleborn Tactics a little bit more too, because now I'm keeping track of animals that die and then animals that players are using to kill those animals. So who kills the animal and which animal dies, and kind of I'm keeping track of all those stats. So now I've got data on like which kind of animals tend to be a preference for people and which kind of animals tend to be just kind of ignored by people. So the advantages of analytical design are pretty much kind of what I talked about. It lets you see these inconsistencies. It lets you see these problems with the flow that you didn't know existed. For example, in the updated version of Battleborn Tactics, one of the things I didn't foresee was how drastic of a change the game would be. So one of the major changes I made was originally each unit had 2 action points, and now your whole team has 3 action points. So they're shared beyond the team. And so you can move 1 unit 3 times. You can attack with 1 unit 3 times if you want. Like you can break those up however you want. Whereas before you could only use 1 skill 1 time. So once you moved, you couldn't move again. And then once you attacked, you couldn't attack again. And then you only got 2 action points per unit. So there was a big change in difficulty when I made that change. And I felt like it was the right change. And I felt like I was overpowered, because one of the things I was apprehensive about was the fact that you can, if somebody's in your range, you can attack them 3 times with 1 unit. I was like, that's kind of broken. There's no way that's going to work out. Like there's no way, because it's way too powerful. You can attack 3 times with the same unit. Like that's just a multiplier on damage. If you do 2 damage, now you do 6 damage. That's just stupid. It's ridiculous. But by looking at the data, the game got harder, not easier. And then I did the math and I was like, oh, well, that makes sense, because you used to have, given a team of 3 and 2 action points per unit, you used to have 6 action points. But now you've only got 3. So even though you could attack 3 times with the same unit, which you'd probably attack with your strongest unit, right? Just as a strategic choice, you still have less overall damage dealing power. And then I took into account like the way that things change and the psychology of how people get attached to certain units and then tend to favor those units over giving the other guys movement. They kind of just pick a unit they like and then just use those. Change the game drastically. And that's stuff that I never, because my first instinct, my intuition said, no, this is too powerful. It said, this is too broken. People are, it's going to break the game. That was my intuition. And if I would have followed my intuition and not looked at the data, I might have made a different choice. I might have made it not as fun of a game. So this is coming from somebody that primarily is an intuitive designer. That's kind of how I work. But there's definitely huge advantages to actually looking at the data and designing that first. And then finally, just to kind of wrap all this up in an argument, I released a video a while back called The Viable Genres, right? And what genres I think are viable, and what genres I think have high demand but low supply, and kind of like just kind of what I've been following from different people and different research and all these different things. And so this game very much is, Battleborn Tactics specifically, this game very much is a beautiful hybrid of analytical design and intuitive design. But I've taken the approach not just analytical and intuitive in the game design, but also in the marketing, right? I've looked at the genres, I've looked at the viability of these genres, I've looked at how well the average tactics game does, I've looked at all this stuff. And then I've also like, what do I think would do well, right? Because I've sold stuff now, I've sold my games, I've had to sell products and stuff like that. What do I think would do well? And I found this project that I think is this beautiful match of like commercial viability mixed with analytical, like pure data driven viability, right? Like I've got actual data that says for whatever reason people play this game more than my other games, right? But I also got this feeling inside that says, hey, I think my gut says this is the right feeling. So there are pros and cons to both approaches, but unlike theme versus mechanics, a lot of people tend to gravitate towards one of them, and I would highly recommend that whatever one you feel, like whatever intuition, right, whatever one you tend to gravitate towards, I'd highly recommend you kind of verse yourself and understand the other side, because a lot of times as humans, the biggest insights that we can get are the insights that are on the opposite of our worldview, right? Like all of the stuff that we understand is cool and that makes us who we are. But usually the biggest stuff to gain is the stuff that's like outside of our understanding, right? The stuff that like we're not comfortable with, right? Like a lot of people hate marketing, a lot of people hate data and stuff. But if you hate that, chances are that's going to be the biggest beneficial thing for you to possibly do, because you can learn so much. And this data, this whole analysis and really looking at all this stuff has taught me a ton about like how my feelings are incorrect. How like whenever I think something's going to break the game, I should always try it, because like I could be completely blown away. I should look at the data and really figure out like whether or not what I did broke the game. It's also encouraged me to kind of what I call exaggerating the shit out of everything. That's like a game design philosophy of mine now. And if I was purely an intuitive designer, there's a lot of stuff that I was hesitant to do because I thought it was going to break the game. But then when I actually play it, I'm like, oh my God, this feels awesome. We give a bonus action point now on kill. Remember how hesitant I was to let you have 3 action points to attack 3 times in a row? Now I let you attack 3 times in a row, and if you kill an enemy, I give you a bonus action point, and you can keep going, and you got the combos for days on that. You can just continually go. And I thought that was never going to work. My intuition said no, but my analytical side of my data says yes. And then once I actually played it too, my intuition changed its mind and it was like, yes, this is perfect. This is great. This feels amazing. So there's 2 sides. I recommend you verse yourself in both sides, but either way, I want to say thank you to these lovely people right here. They help me keep doing what I'm doing every single weekday, giving you daily game dev content. Thank you very much. If you want your name on this list, you can head over to patreon.com/GameDevUnderground. There's lots of tools there to help you build, finish, and launch better games. But either way, I want to say thank you for watching. You're amazing. And I will see you again very shortly.